Hey everyone. All right, so I am currently live over on TikTok and YouTube, and I figured I would just hop on since it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon and just answer some questions because the AP exam is really close. It's like a week and 2 days away. So if you're just joining live on TikTok or on YouTube, go ahead and ask some questions in the chat, and I'll just kind of give you some tips as we go. I apologize if there's like random birds in the background or like barking. I am outside. But anyway, let's talk about some ways that you can prepare for the AP exam because we do have a little bit of time left for you to study. And I know some of you are probably already studying for other topics as well. So here's one thing I want you to think about. Have you done any timed essays lately? I'm sure some of you probably have because I know some of my teacher friends have done mock exams in the past week or two where they've had their students write timed essays. But if the answer is no, and you're like, yeah, I haven't written anything in a while, that's going to be something that would be really helpful to do over the next couple days, over the next week. Go on the College Board's website and look up past exam prompts and choose one, whichever essay type you think is the weakest for you right now. Go ahead and time yourself for 40 minutes and write that essay. Now, if it's synthesis that you choose, give yourself about 10 or 15 minutes to read the sources on top of the 40 minutes to write. And then what you can do is after you've written that essay, if you want feedback on it, you can look at some of the student samples and compare your work to that. And that way you have a means of figuring out where you currently stand as far as your writing. So definitely check out those exam prompts as a way to prepare, because I think one of the hardest things for students is simply just pacing during that 40 minutes. Now on the exam, they're going to cue you and they're going to say, 40 minutes has passed. We recommend you move on to your next essay, but technically you can keep writing if you want to. So I like for students to do at least one timed essay leading up to the exam, maybe two if you want to, but I think it's really good practice. So if you're just joining us, welcome. Go ahead and leave some questions in the chat. We'll answer anything on TikTok or YouTube all about the AP Lang exam. So let's talk about test day, because I know that sometimes we, as teachers, we assume that you guys know what to do on test day, but that's not always the case, especially if you haven't taken AP tests before, because some of you might not have. So here's what you're going to need on test day. If you're responsible for bringing your own pens and pencils, you're going to want at least 2 pencils. Make sure they have an eraser. Make sure they're sharpened. You also might want pens. You need blue or black ink pens for the essays, and they can't be erasable pens. And I know that's kind of frustrating. Your school might provide snacks and stuff like that for you. And then all the materials that you need for the test are given to you that day. So when you start the test, you're going to start with multiple choice, and you're going to be given some little stickers with your AP ID or something on it. And that's to help you with keeping track of your stuff. You're also going to get a booklet that has the multiple choice questions in it, and you're going to have an answer sheet. So you want to make sure that you are answering all 45 questions because you have 1 hour to do that. Even if it's just a guess, you want to answer those questions. And then after that 1 hour has passed, you get a 10-minute break. So that's a great time to use the restroom if you need to, eat a quick snack if you can, and then you start your writing. So the writing is 2 hours and 15 minutes. And so basically for that, you get told after 15 minutes has passed. That's how long they recommend you read for. Usually students start with the synthesis essay and they read that and then they start writing the synthesis essay, but you can start writing before the 15 minutes is up. And then they'll tell you after 40 minutes have passed, and they'll do that for I guess technically twice. And I can't remember exactly, but they might give you a 10-minute warning as well. So that's kind of the format of the exam, but feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, maybe questions about any of the different essay types. If there's anything that you're wondering about, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the AP Lang exam. And if you are enjoying this, if you're over on TikTok, go ahead and like the video, please. Thank you so much to those that have sent likes already. And if you're on YouTube, feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. Someone said tips to come up with a thesis for the argument. Okay, great question. So here's the thing. A lot of the argument prompts are kind of I don't know, I consider them philosophical. I don't know if that's how other people think of it, but I tell my students to put their reasons in their thesis, not your exact evidence. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say you're talking about, I'm trying to think of one I've done with my students lately. I did a workshop on one where we did the value of curiosity. Okay, so if you're going to tell me that curiosity is valuable because it leads to personal growth and innovation, those words would be in your thesis. So those are your reasons. And that's kind of like the big picture category. And your examples might be things like Thomas Edison, or it might be like a personal anecdote that you have. Don't put those in your thesis. Save those for like the body paragraph, because if you give your exact examples in your thesis, it kind of spoils it. So that's one way. Now, to be defensible, it just has to be a statement. You don't have to do anything fancy. You can literally just say, like, if the prompt is the value of curiosity, curiosity is valuable because, and then like reason one, reason two. That's defensible. It'll earn you the point. Some students like to do what we call a counter argument thesis, and those have pros and cons. A counter argument thesis is when you say something like although, and then you address like the side that you're not going to argue. So like something like, although curiosity can be detrimental because it can cause problems, it is valuable because of the fact that it leads to personal growth and innovation. So you can start with although and address the counter argument, and then you can say your thesis. You don't have to do it that way. A lot of students who take, I think it's probably like A push, but maybe even AP World, they are used to using that thesis frame for their DBQs, and so they use it in argument. But that's kind of just the gist of the argument essay. Don't overthink your thesis because it's 1 point out of 6, but also last year on the exam for Q3 argument, 97% of students earned the thesis point. For rhetorical analysis, it was about 90%, and I think synthesis was about 98%. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to write a defensible thesis. You want to have a game plan. You want to know what you're talking about. You want to know like what your 2 or 3 main ideas are, but the most important part of your essay is the body paragraphs. So just kind of keep that in mind as far as your thesis. And you can also rewrite your thesis and your conclusion if you think you can write it better. All right, someone said, would we need 3 points for every essay? Is it okay to put less? Absolutely okay to do 2. As far as like 2 body paragraphs. A lot of my students do not have time for 3 body paragraphs or 3 points, if you will. So some of them do. And sometimes it depends on the prompt, and sometimes it depends on the essay type. But 2 main ideas or points, 2 body paragraphs is totally fine. It's better, at least in my opinion, to have 2 quality paragraphs as opposed to like 3 kind of simplistic ones. So the key is going to be your evidence and your commentary, really your commentary. So 2 body paragraphs is totally fine. Like, do not stress about that. What are the most common rhetorical devices and passages? Okay, this is a great question. So I actually have a video about this on my YouTube channel if you want to see so like maybe like the top 10 that are most common, plus like how to write about them. There is a video on that. But since you're here, let me answer your question as well. I would say some of the most common ones would be repetition. And there's different types of repetition, but you don't need to use fancy names. So like anaphora is a type of repetition. Epistrophe is a type of repetition. You don't need to use those words. Just say repetition. In fact, say repeats because we want to use active verbs. So repetition is one. Examples is another one. And so sometimes the examples are like 3 or 4 examples that are all kind of related to each other to prove the point. And they're all short examples, or the speaker might give like one big example. So if it's one big example, definitely analyze that. If it's a grouping of examples, think about what they have in common, and also look at the order of the examples, because sometimes the order matters. In Florence Kelly's speech, if you're familiar with that prompt, it was from the 2011 exam. She put examples of state laws because she was talking about child labor, and she started in the South because that's like the furthest away from where she was speaking. She was speaking in Philadelphia. So she started talking about like Alabama and Georgia, New Jersey. And then she ended with an example from Philadelphia because it was like the most personal. So it was a series of examples, but the order matters. So we've got repetition, we've got examples. I would say don't focus too much on the appeals, logos, ethos, pathos. If you notice those, ask yourself what's creating the appeal. So if you notice logos or logic, then it's probably because there's facts or examples or statistics. So anytime you see those, it's logical. For emotional appeals, it's usually the word choice and tone and maybe the description or detail. So those are choices as well. And then credibility, well, ethos could be credibility or morals, but usually I see a lot more of like credibility. Usually it's personal pronouns, like when they're saying I. So you could look at that as well. And there's a few other common choices. An anecdote is like a short story. That one is usually that one's usually common sometimes. Also, here's a tip though, if you're like, well, what if I don't know the rhetorical devices? Because you can memorize like 10 devices, but and probably a couple of them will be present. But what if you don't see anything? Ask yourself what they're doing, because sometimes it's not about like repetition, but they might be trying to flatter their audience. Flattery is a choice too. Or they might be trying to like rally their audience to believe in something. They might be trying to like create an enemy. A lot of times in like war speeches, like around like wartime, they do stuff like that. So keep that in mind as well. If all else fails, there's always word choice and tone. So there's always going to be a certain type of word that they're using, and it's going to always create a tone. So like if all else fails, definitely look at that. Someone said I'm struggling with trying to write commentary that's not summarizing the sources. Okay, so I'm assuming this might be a synthesis question, but I have a video that I'm working on about synthesis commentary, like an updated one. We were talking about synthesis in my class this past week, and I told my students for their commentary, there's some quick tips you can do. The word because is helpful because it gets to the why, like why your evidence matters. Using words like highlights, demonstrates, illustrates, those all work really well. But for synthesis, especially, and maybe argument as well, though not always for argument, you can ask yourself some questions. So if you're struggling with your synthesis commentary, ask yourself who is helped or harmed by this issue. So, like, who benefits from it? So, if it's like a school related topic, is it teachers? Is it students? And then, like, how does it benefit them? Also, think about the short term and long term effects of something. So, like, how is this issue relevant now in our society today? And how is it relevant in the future? I suppose you could also think about the past too, depending on the topic. But if you're able to talk about those things, that might help you go beyond the sources. But I am working on a YouTube video about that because I think with synthesis, there's a way to kind of think big picture that can really help with your commentary. That way you don't feel like you're being as redundant, because I know that can be kind of tricky. Someone said, I struggle with reading articles that are too long for synthesis. Do you have any advice for minimizing reading time? Okay. This is probably not the most popular advice with some teachers, but I'm going to tell you what I would do. If it's really long, look at the topic sentences of each of the paragraphs. And I would probably read like the intro paragraph and the conclusion paragraph of the source. This is for synthesis. This is not for rhetorical analysis. For rhetorical analysis, read the whole thing. But if you have a really long synthesis source and you're stressed for time, read like the first paragraph and look at the topic sentences and read the last paragraph. That'll give you the gist of what it's about, and you can decide, will I use this source in my essay? If so, you might want to look at it more closely. If not, you keep going. If you decide this source does not matter to me, do not waste your time reading it. But the reason why I say read the topic sentences is because a lot of the sources that I've seen from the College Board, the topic sentence does tell you the main idea of the paragraph, so you can get the gist without reading the whole thing. So that would be one way to speed up. And another way to speed up is like, if you know you're not going to use it, don't bother. Also with the visual text, like graphs, charts, pictures, cartoons, sometimes it's better to save those for last, because if they put them early on, if it's like source A or source B, sometimes it's hard to know why they matter because you haven't read enough of the perspectives yet. So if you look at a source and you're like, I don't understand why I would have this picture here, like what am I supposed to do with this? Go back to it. Usually photos are neutral. They don't really choose any inflammatory photos, but like charts, you can use the data. Cartoons, think about like why the artist made the cartoon, like what's the message they're trying to convey. But yeah, I would maybe save the visual sources to the end, because then you might be able to connect it to a source better. Okay, so those were some questions over on YouTube. I'm like trying to do both YouTube and TikTok. So someone said tone is always my go-to. Yeah, tone is definitely there. Okay, I think this is a two-part question. If we're doing two body paragraphs, should we do two pieces of textual evidence per each paragraph? That's what I recommend, honestly, because I feel like if you only do like one piece of evidence, it's just not very convincing. It's a formula that I use, and like take it or leave it, because formulas you can kind of manipulate it. But I tell my students to do a topic sentence, evidence, commentary, like two pieces of commentary if you can, transition to more evidence and more commentary, and then have a concluding sentence. Now, each of those isn't it's necessarily its own sentence, except a topic sentence and concluding sentence are usually a sentence. But like evidence, it could take you 2 sentences, it could take you 1. Commentary, you could do it in 2 sentences, maybe it's 3. I've even seen some kids do 4. Sometimes that's really hard though. But like I like that transition. I call them layers of evidence and commentary. I just think it helps to have like 2, but that's not a rule. That's just like my recommendation. In the rhetorical analysis, should I mention the devices in the, I think it's topic sentence that I'll talk about later in the paragraph? Yes. Sorry, I was trying to decide if TS meant topic sentence or thesis, and I probably should have realized it was topic sentence. Yes. Sort of like the topic sentence should convey the main idea of the paragraph. So if you're not going to use the actual choice, like verb or the device noun, it needs to be a functional topic sentence. Like it needs to kind of hint at the main idea. A lot of times students will put it in there. Also, a little quick tip about topic sentences, which applies to all essays, is like for your second body paragraph, try to use your topic as a sentence as a transition. I just did a video about this over on YouTube. So if you want more information, definitely check out that video. But your topic sentences for like your second body paragraph, and if you do a third body paragraph, that's a great way to help your line of reasoning. Try to connect the dots for your reader. So try not to say something like another reason is, or another choice is. Try to refer back to what you said in the first paragraph and then introduce the main idea. So I give you some sentence frames for that in the video. But yeah, you want the topic of your paragraph to be obvious from the topic sentence, in my opinion. And I say that as someone who's read for the exam, and also read a lot of essays for like my state. We do a mock exam. You want it to be clear what the point of the paragraph is. And that's why concluding sentences matter too, because I've read so many student paragraphs where like we got through the paragraph and then it was like, okay, wait a minute, what were they saying? And if they had just had a concluding sentence that kind of tied back to their main idea or their thesis, it would have helped the paragraph. So it's not that it like made them lose points, but it made it a less pleasurable reading experience. What do you do if you get stuck on multiple choice? Move on. I'm actually uploading a video, hopefully later tonight, about writing multiple choice tips. Because I like the writing multiple choice way better than the reading. I don't know if any of you feel that way, but I hate the reading comprehension questions. Like, not my fave. But if you're spending the whole hour on multiple choice, I would say maybe spend no more than 35 minutes on reading and 25 on writing. The writing multiple choice questions can usually be done a little bit more quickly. But here's what you need to know. Each question is worth 1 point. So no matter how easy or hard it is, it's 1 point. Therefore, don't waste time on one question and spend like 5 minutes trying to get it right when you could be answering 4 more questions that you get right. So if you're getting stuck, give it your best guess, bubble something in, and maybe make a note on your paper, like, because you can write on your booklet, like not your answer sheet, like you just bubble in on your answer sheet, but in the booklet, you can take notes on it. And so if you've never seen like an AP test like this, it's something you need to know is usually it's the left side is the passage and the right side is the multiple choice. And then if you flip the page, they reprint the passage. So if you take like too many notes on one page, like we do want you to annotate if you want to, but you get like a clean copy of the passage. If you've ever done, like if your teacher has printed the tests from AP Classroom for you, like the full test, you do it that way. So just know that you're going to see the same passage multiple times because let's say you have questions 1 through 5 and you turn the page, they're going to reprint the passage and then they're going to give you like 6 through 10 or something like that. So just kind of keep that in mind. But you can write, like go back to number 6 and just give it your best guess and then come back to it. But don't waste time getting stuck. As far as like multiple choice, use process of elimination. So get rid of silly answer choices because usually you can get rid of at least 2. If you narrow it down to 2 and you're like, I don't know which one to choose the one that is most precise, or especially for reading, like that definitely addresses that part of the passage. And for writing, There's a lot of different types of questions, so it's hard to give a general tip, but that video that I'm working on, if you subscribe over on YouTube, that video should be up tonight or tomorrow, and I kind of go through each question type and like tell you what to think about. How do I add sophistication into my intro for rhetorical analysis? Great question. I would say I have more tips about conclusions, writing more sophisticated conclusions. But I would say for the intro for rhetorical analysis, make sure it's clear what the rhetorical situation is. If it's a historical passage and you know the history, you can include some of that. But usually I tell students to kind of keep their intro short and go for sophistication throughout the essay and in your conclusion. So for your conclusion, something that I want you to ask yourself is, if the passage is historically relevant for rhetorical analysis, why does it matter? So like, what's been the lasting impact of that? Especially if it's like a famous person or a famous event. If it's not, think about the message or the argument. So ask yourself, how is this message or argument relevant today? And like, is it? I haven't really seen one that I would say isn't relevant, or like, because you can kind of modify it a little bit, but like, ask yourself, how is it relevant today? So if the passage is about like perseverance or justice, how is that issue relevant today? And save that for your conclusion. And that, I'm not promising it'll get you sophistication, but at the very least, it should help your commentary. Someone said, what's the easiest way to earn the sophistication point? I think it's situating the issue in a broader context, like thinking big picture and going beyond the passage. The other ways you can do it, there's counter argument or like nuanced argument. I've seen that flop a lot. Like, I can tell when kids are trying for it, but I think it's hard to get it. Vivid and descriptive writing. If you are really good with your like punctuation and you can use colons and dashes and you have good word choice, and or like you're into creative writing, you might be able to get it that way. But the way most of my students get it, and it could be because of how I teach it, I don't know, is situating the issue in a broader context. For rhetorical analysis, you can also look at like the tension between like speaker and audience, if that's present. So that would just be one thing about sophistication. Okay, so I struggle with argumentative and coming up with evidence. Yes, that's really common. Here's the thing. I think it's helpful to brainstorm like ideas first, maybe just jot down some notes and then figure out, okay, what is the most convincing evidence? You are allowed to write about personal experience for argument. You can even incorporate a little bit of personal experience in synthesis as well if it's relevant. It depends on the prompt. If you take like APUSH, AP World, you might have some historical evidence to draw from, because as you're studying for those classes, you might just kind of inadvertently be studying for AP Lang. Current events. But I've even had students write about like stuff that normally we would think like, oh, that's a silly thing to write about. I just had my students do an essay a couple weeks ago, and I had a group of students, they all planned their essay together, and the only evidence they could come up with was Tangled and Moana. And they made it super convincing, and like they ended up getting a decent score. Now afterwards I was like, okay, girls, they were talking about like exploring the unknown. So they were talking about how like Rapunzel and Tangled like went out into the unknown and Moana went out into the unknown. And I was like, okay, I appreciate that you couldn't think of anything beyond Disney, and you did a good job writing about it. Like, if you're going to write about Disney, they did it as well as they could. But I was like, couldn't you connect that to like, I don't know, going away to college? Because some of them have older siblings that I had as students. Like, talk about going away to college and how that's the unknown, or talk about like immigrating, like moving states or moving countries or something. And they're like, oh yeah. So if you can only think of stuff that you think is like cheesy, try to think of like the same issue, but in a different light. But whatever evidence you choose, stick with it and just explain like how it answers the prompt. So what does it show or reveal or illustrate about that issue? Because I've seen some good essays, like decent essays with evidence that maybe wasn't so sophisticated. You only have 40 minutes and you're writing under pressure. So I feel like teachers kind of, at least on the exam, like we take that into consideration. Someone said, what types of diction do writers use? I have a whole video about writing about diction, but you want to put an adjective in front of it. So you don't want to just say the writer uses diction, because that literally means the writer uses words, which is kind of like every writer has done. So that comes across as like a really obvious statement. Put an adjective in front of it. So is it patriotic? Is it like sentimental? Is it inflammatory? Like, are they trying to like create tension? Is it complimentary? So basically think of like a tone word or an adjective to put in front of it. It could be inclusive, like if they're trying to like unite everybody together, or it could be like divisive if they're trying to like pit people against each other, like an us versus them kind of thing. So those are some examples of diction. Is it possible to get a 4 out of 4 with evidence only using personal anecdotes? I would say yes. I haven't seen a College Board sample that did that, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. Keep in mind that some prompts are going to lend themselves to personal experience more than others. So with personal experience, if you're writing about that, make sure it's meaningful. So make sure it's something that led to personal growth or like a passion of yours, obviously depending on what the prompt is. But if you can't think of a real world example besides yourself, then go for it, because honestly, something is better than nothing. So we'd rather have you write like 2 paragraphs and just try to connect it to the prompt as opposed to like not attempting it. So would I prefer you to do like a personal anecdote and maybe like a current event or a historical example? Yeah, probably. But like, I'm not going to tell you don't only use personal anecdotes, because if that's the most convincing argument, go for it. Okay, so I've got about 2 or 3 more minutes left because I have a tutoring session that I have to get to, but I'll try to answer 1 or 2 more questions. And then if possible, I'll hop on both YouTube and TikTok. If not tonight, definitely a couple times before the exam. So like shameless plug, but please make sure you're following on YouTube and TikTok. That way you get those notifications. What state am I in? I'm in Arkansas. I don't know if I have an accent. I probably do. I grew up in Connecticut, so I kind of have like a mixed accent. At least that's what my students tell me. Do you have a strategy for which timed write to do first? I think most students should start with the synthesis because it's the most time consuming, and I feel like it's just good to get it out of the way. And I think because most students do that, the synthesis essays tend to be the higher scores. I love rhetorical analysis, so I would do the exam in order because that's my preference. Argument's my least favorite. And honestly, if I were a student, like if I'm thinking back to me in high school, I probably could write an argument essay in 30 minutes. And if I were to write it in 40 minutes, my score maybe would go up a point, maybe, but I could probably get the same score in like 30 minutes or 40 minutes because like it's going to be what it's going to be. But I would say as a student, you need to come up with your game plan. So figure out, like they recommend 40 minutes per essay, but if you would do better spending 45 on one, 35 on another, plan for that. But play to your strengths. I tell my students to prioritize the essays that they feel strongest in because it's a points game. And so like, if you know that you're going to do better if you do synthesis first or rhetorical analysis first or argument first, like prioritize the ones that you do better in and spend more time on it. I think for most students that advice works. Obviously it might not apply to everybody. I just had a prompt and related it to current events. Yeah, that's awesome. Anytime you can connect it to the real world, it's good. If you aren't good at introductions, do you recommend just writing a thesis and getting into the evidence? Yes. Your intro, in my opinion, should be short. The body paragraphs are much more important. So write a thesis and then go to your next paragraph and then start with your topic sentence. So separate it. It really helps us readers if like you have separate paragraphs. So it is okay if you have a 1-sentence intro and it's just a thesis. I try to tell my students try for like 1 to 3 sentences because sometimes for synthesis and rhetorical analysis, I feel like it's better if there's a sentence or 2 before your thesis. But if you are pressed for time or if you're panicking or having writer's block, just write a defensible thesis and move on. Like, trust me, people do it all the time. Okay, so I think I answered most of the questions. If I did not get to your question, there's 2 things you can do. 1, go to one of my recent videos and write a comment with your question. It doesn't matter if it's relevant to the video or not, and I will try to respond either in writing or with a video reply. I like to try to do that on TikTok. Or if you have other questions, feel free to check my YouTube channel. You can just type in like the topic that you're wanting, and I have playlists and videos for all that as well. And I will be going live between now in the exam a few times, possibly tonight. No promises though, because I have 2 little kiddos that have to get to bed. But I will definitely try to be live on both platforms to answer questions. And also I'm on Instagram, Coach Hall Writes. If you send me a DM there, I try to respond to all those as well. So if I didn't get to your question and you're like, man, I really needed to know that answer, reach out on TikTok or Instagram and I will do my best to get back to you. Okay. But thank you all for joining me for like a quick Q&A and best of luck on the exam.